Hi friends, welcome to the NPTEL course Strategy and Technology, a Practical Primer. We are in week 5 with the theme of buyers, suppliers and competitors. In this lecture, which is the 23rd in the series, we discuss the topic of competitive moves. What are competitive moves? These are the moves that are made by firms in an industry in order to gain competitive advantage. To give a gist of what this lecture would entail, all the players in an industry can be categorized in terms of two critical dimensions. One, the ability to influence the market. Two, the ability to compete with other firms. In terms of market influence, each of the firms could be of three different classifications: market creators, market maintainers, or market destroyers. From the perspective of competitive advantage, firms typically fall into one of the three groups: share builders, share maintainers, and share losers. Based on these two dimensions and three dimensions of subclassification in each, we can create a 9-grid matrix. This 9-grid matrix correlates with revenue, profit, and markers rather well. The aspiration of the firms must be to move from inferior to superior grids. As a result of this framework, this lecture suggests a novel and more insightful and granulated approach for competitive moves on the above lines. Let us look at the types of competition that typically exist in an industry. Because an industry typically has multiple players, of course, the most desired position for any firm is to be in a monopoly situation. In current times, a monopolistic situation is almost non-existent. In the monopolistic situation, for other firms, entry and growth are the most challenging because the incumbent has got a very strong position, having almost created the industry single-handed. At the same time, the monopolist firm also will have issues in trying to defend its monopoly position and the market share, which is 100%. Duopoly exists in certain sunrise or technology-intensive industries that start taking shape. It may also exist when regulations and control new entry. In certain of the duopolies, there would be a very dominant or major player and another would be a minor player. If you look at the search space, Google is still the dominant player, whereas Microsoft Bing is a weak player. In most cases of the industry, oligopoly defines the nature of the industry structure. Oligopoly means presence of number of competitors in an industry. An oligopoly falls in between a monopoly where there is only one firm in an industry and the perfectly competitive industry where there could be several firms. In an oligopoly, firms tend to have their own entry and growth options, but competition amongst well-stabilized, well-positioned suppliers can be challenging. In the perfectly competitive industry, which is probably the ultimate goal for a society to benefit, entry into industry is relatively easy and the competitive moves of firms are affected more by market conditions than by each other's moves. This is the general competitive structure that exists in an industry: monopoly, duopoly, oligopoly, and the perfectly competitive situation. Why do firms have dilemmas in addressing the competition or in developing their own competitive strategies? Typically, there are two options for a firm. One, pursue the interests of the industry as a whole, that is, being self-enlightened, being enlightened for the industry. Two, behave in the firm's own narrow self-interest to the max extent possible. If an industry approach is taken, the benefit is that it avoids strong competitive reactions from other competitors. On the other hand, if the company is focused on its own goals, and that too at any cost, the company would run the risk of retaliation escalating to a full-scale industry battle. Generally, if the interests of the industry are pursued as a whole within a band, the overall survival rate and growth rates for the firms tend to be higher. On the other hand, if firms all display self-interest, the competitive intensity and rivalry would be so high that the industry will eventually be harmed by themselves. These dilemmas are developed based on the past data on how the firms behave and certain futuristic assumptions on how firms could behave. If these are not adequately etched out, the intensity of the dilemmas would only enhance. So it is important for analysts of strategy to understand the triggers for various competitive dilemmas and take an appropriate view. Between industry level cooperation and firm level competition, there are certain aspects that need to be taken care of. Industry level cooperation avoids erosive warfare. For example, aggressive drops in prices of products and also aggressive introduction of new products, which when specifications are closely looked at may not matter much, but the clutter increases in the industry. So if you want industry level cooperation, price behavior must be moderate and realistic. Similarly, the products must have good life cycle rather than clutter the market space. When you look at firm level competition, there are some positives going for it, because firm level competition is the basis for customers to be served better. It helps build better strength and resilience if the firm level competition is within reasonable limits. There could be scale and share for those companies which are competent. There would also be brand loyalty. And because firm level competition is high, the industry will have certain level of entry barrier which allows the existing companies to prosper within the pie that is available. A firm must essentially act in the interests of the stakeholders. So a firm cannot say that I would not compete with anybody. It is the duty of the firm to compete with other firms, gain more revenue, more profitability for the stakeholders. But it is also incumbent on the firm to serve the customers better in that process with rationality, with helpfulness for the customers. This does not mean that a firm needs to be hyper competitive, driving out competition because it is a lose-all game. This acts against the interests of the consumers and even societies and nations many a time. There are three approaches to competition which are not completely independent of each other, but we need to study the industry and the competitors within the industry to understand which strategy or which approach to take. The first strategy is to develop strengths, that is, understand the key success factors of the competitors and get better at those factors. When Reliance Jio came into the Indian telecom industry with certain aggressive plans and execution, Airtel did not collapse. Airtel understood the strengths of Jio and upgraded its telecom gear and also telecom service. The other approach is to exploit weaknesses. The firm will understand the key weaknesses of the competitors and hits the competition where it hurts the most. Again, example of Reliance Jio. When it entered the telecom industry market, it understood that Vodafone Idea represents a weak spot in the telecommunication industry. It had several weaknesses going for it. So Jio hit VI on pricing and data plans. The third approach is to do what is best. That is, be focused on the company's strengths and pursue a path of technological virtuosity. You do not so much bother about the industry's evolution or the firm's competitive moves, but do what you think is the best for the company and for the industry as well as the stakeholders. Tesla, which started on the electric vehicle mission almost 10 years ago, is conforming to this template. It has moved on autonomy as well as electrification far ahead of the big automobile companies, and it truly believed that this is the way it has to go, and that was the way in which it had to build its strengths. So do what is best is one thing which will help firms which are technologically competent, because they will keep improving their technological strength and ensure operational excellence. Different companies, as I said, have achieved different levels of success using these three approaches, and it all depended on the starting positions of the firms in the industry. Under each approach, again, there could be 4 types of moves. These moves are cooperative moves, non-threatening moves, threatening moves, and defensive moves. What are cooperative moves? When all the players in the industry understand the structural dynamics of the industry and the economic realities and take within a reasonable band same or similar approaches, not because of cartelization but because they understand the industry structure, they fall under the definition of cooperative moves. Second, non-threatening moves, that is making only those improvements, those capacity additions that are necessary for posting a reasonable industry aligned growth. So making marginal capacity additions or making minor product improvements are taken as normal by all the competitors in the industry, and everybody would be making those things in the interest of serving the customers better. The third category is the threatening moves category. Building new plants, unleashing a flurry of new products, preempting the capacity, aggressive product price wars, poaching people from the competitors. These are all threatening moves. Other competitors feel threatened and some use similar threatening moves, in which case the industry will be a lose all kind of situation. Some may balk at that and keep quiet. Fourth is the category of defensive moves. That is, look for capabilities within yourself, enhancing internal capabilities, protecting current market position, protecting the current market turf, fall under the category of defensive moves. These competitive moves vary in terms of investment intensity and revenue profit potential, as well as the risk reward balance. These are basically determined by the nature and the level of competitive response from each of the players. A company which wants to do the threatening moves will not make the threatening moves if the competitors could also make similar moves. But as I said in the previous case, Reliance Jio felt that the competitors Airtel and Vodafone Idea may not make such threatening moves and went on to make those threatening moves and garner capacity as well as market share. The competitive moves are many times beyond the sole ambit of the firm. The industry dynamics play a significant role in the various competitive moves in their nature and scale. What are the structural dynamics of the industry that impact competitive moves? 1. Stability and instability of the industry, growth potential, profit potential, technological intensity, investment intensity, talent intensity. Now, in the thermal power industry, the industry dynamics are related to the environmental factors in a great way, and those factors could determine the stability or instability of the industry in terms of future capacity additions in thermal power and also future availability of coal. When we say future, we are not talking about next 1 year or 2 years, we are talking about 5 to 10 years. So those structural dynamics must be understood in making competitive moves. Just because NTPC has strong thermal power capability, Tata Power cannot go and make a similar capacity addition. Instead of that, the company could profitably look at other emergent areas of renewable power. The second reason why competition tends to be high relates to the commitment of the firms to the industry. Some companies stand committed to their industries. It could be due to the legacy position, having been in the business for decades, stakeholder expectations, because there is an entire ecosystem which is related to the firm's success in that industry, and shareholders are also used to that industry and that company. Founders' propensity, that is, if the founders come with some key capabilities relating to the industry, they would tend to stay with the industry. Leadership preferences. Founders are one plank, but the leaders, that is the professional managers, are another plank. They tend to come with their own preferences. Company strengths and weaknesses, we have studied that in the previous lectures, and talent availability and access. When you combine structural dynamics and the commitment of the firms to the industry, you will get the canvas of competitive moves. Typically, the competitive moves are strategies that leverage structural dynamics and meet stakeholder expectations. And in that process, they leverage the strengths and overcome the weaknesses. They are also influenced very much by the founders and leaders in terms of their active roles. When Tata Group went into nano motor car production, it didn't really look at disseminating information on the lack of safety of two-wheeler riding by families, although that was the intent with which nano car was designed, conceptualized and executed. Instead, it had a very noble way of advertising itself in terms of appealing to the youth, in terms of the uniqueness of being the smallest car at the lowest price, etc. But had the company decided to be a little threatening to the two-wheeler industry and positioned itself as a better alternative for two-wheeler movement by families, probably Nana would not have been a losing proposition. So the intentions and the emotional mindsets of the founders and the key leaders influenced such a sober approach to marketing, and that had its own impact in terms of the company's strength in the marketplace. It also may be noticed that firms belonging to the same conglomerate resort to different competitive moves depending on the industry in which the firm operates and the commitment to the industry. TCS within the Tata Group may be much more aggressive and much more external environment seeking compared to Tata Steel or Tata Chemicals, or for that matter even the FMCG, Tata Consumer Products. Until a few years ago, Tata Power was a passive player in the power industry. Today it has become an aggressive player in the energy industry. So when the environment changes, the competitive moves by companies also could change. The framework for triggering the competitive moves are generic custom framework. That is, whether the firm is specially impacted by the industry level and economy level forces. Are they applicable for all the players in the industry or are more applicable for the singular firm? So the AGR decisions or the spectrum sale decisions are more relevant for Vodafone Idea, which has financial stringency compared to all the others, even though it is a generic move by the government. The second aspect is that the moves could be scope-wise, functional or strategic. And the third is that the moves could be of short lead time or long lead time. A company, when it makes its competitive moves, has to look at economic moves, regulatory moves and industry forces that happen within the broader organizational ecosystem and the economic ecosystem. Let's take two examples, one from the automobile industry and the other from the sugar industry, to illustrate how forces that are beyond a firm can support or can oppose competitive moves by the firms. And they also present dilemmas in that process. Therefore, competitive moves must be an integral part of strategy. Let's look at the Indian automobile industry. It is faced with the challenges of climate change as well as regulatory mandates. Everyone wants the automobile industry to transform itself into a zero-emission electric vehicle industry. When a player in the industry makes the competitive move in favor of that, it obviously triggers multiple competitive moves by others. And the complexity is seen in the fact that Indian automobile industry is very well diversified in terms of the product categories and also the number of players. We have 20 passenger car firms as an approximation. We have 10 commercial vehicle manufacturers and 15 two-wheeler manufacturers, not to add the new generation electric vehicle manufacturers, maybe numbering about 30 who have come into play. Now, how does the automobile industry work in this kind of paradigm? It starts with the zero emission vehicle goal. One firm is generally first of the block. Then multiple firms follow suit. Some strategies differ. Ola, for example, wants to sell directly to the consumer. It doesn't want to go through dealers. Whereas Bajaj Auto, when it becomes electric, it is going to follow the conventional model with suitable updates and modifications. Some companies set up divisions, that is no legal entity, but with a separately constituted operational division within the company. There could be subsidiaries, there could be joint ventures. There would be overseas technologies and investments brought in. And all of that will be supported by transformations in the supplier ecosystem. There would be governmental incentives. And when all this happens, people see the whole ecosystem maturing, and many other players also would jump into the ecosystem. In this process, even as one story is being written, other stories take shape. There are far too many moving wheels simultaneously happening. one, electric battery is the core of electric vehicle development. But at the same time, we are talking about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. We are also talking about CNG, LNG vehicles as an interim strategy. And we also recognize that the enablers are not so much into vogue at this point of time. When transformation is occurring and the drivers of transformation are so many, which are varying and which are also developing on their own lines, the target, even if it is one, that is zero emission vehicles, different players can follow different competitive strategies and can make different competitive moves. That is the one which renders the complexity of an industry under transformation more challenging than ever. So how is the ecosystem change happening in the automobile industry given this pressure? Tata Power is moving into renewables and charging stations. Hindustan Petroleum, like a few other public sector marketing oil companies, are charging habitats oriented now. They want their fuel areas to be also electric vehicle charging stations. In fact, they want to see themselves as developing into multi-charging energy stations. Then we have Tata Motors, which is definitely getting into electric vehicles, and it has created an entity for the intellectual property of electric passenger vehicles. There are companies such as JBM Group, which are getting into electric buses and electric components. Motherson Sumi Systems wants to get into electric components. Tata Chemicals has made a foray into electric batteries, given the core competence in materials development. Reliance Industries wants to supply hydrogen and also wants to get into renewable energy. Adani is focused on clean energy, which could be an input to the automobile industry transformation. Ashok Leyland has constituted a clear subsidiaries switch for electric vehicle development, particularly in the light commercial vehicle segment, and also entered into joint ventures with Siemens for electric mobility. It also has constituted OHM as a company that will offer EMAS, that is electric mobility as a service. So these are the kinds of changes that are happening in the firms and also in the ecosystem because of the competitive moves that have been taken by the firms. Porter's theory implies somewhat erroneously for this kind of situation. A firm's competitive move would yield a similar advantage over each competitor, and that each competitor makes a similar assumption. As you can see from this canvas, every competitor is proceeding towards the low emission goal, but the strategies that are being adopted are quite different. Let's look at another example, the sugar industry. Sugar industry has always been a cyclical industry. It has been a structurally, if I may say so, impoverished industry with lot of cane arrears to farmers and the sugar prices being volatile. With the government announcing the advancement in June 2021 of the target of blending ethanol into petrol to the extent of 20% to 2023 year, the strategy and structure of the Indian sugar industry has seen a major change in the outlook. Ethanol is a byproduct of producing sugar. So if you look at the sugar industry structure pre-ethanol and post-ethanol, you can see the big structural dynamics change. From being a cyclical industry, it is going to get into a structurally stable industry situation. From being highly debt-laden, it would have better viability. From an unviable situation of maybe 30 sugar mills and several others in the corporate sector fighting with each other, you will find that the debt reduction would lead to better industry stability. Cane arrears to the farmers will be wiped out, and instead with capacity expansion taking place in the industry. So what are the firm level strategic options that are available? All firms may adopt sugar-based ethanol capacity, but it may be noted that not all companies will have the same capability to generate ethanol from sugar, because that also requires certain kind of infrastructure. Some companies such as Renuka Sugar, Triveni Engineering, Dhampur, Balrampur Chini, Dwarkesh, they are reported to have established the capability to drive more ethanol out of their operations. Some sugar mills may decide that they would go in for grain-based ethanol capacity to supplement. Oil companies themselves may get into ethanol production, and they may set up or encourage setting up of grain-based ethanol capacity. Many of the companies certainly would utilize existing capacity for better viability, and they would also pursue global scale through Indian assets. Because the base is now more structurally sound, they have greater ability to compete in the export markets. Brazil is a big competitor to India in the sugar industry. So the firms with better viability could acquire a Brazilian sugar plant for globalization. Eventually, the target of sugar industry would be to become debt free. Consistent with the strengths and weaknesses, each firm in the sugar industry may view the post-ethanol scenario from different perspectives, and the list of competitive moves in the industry could be diverse. So this analyzes the past data of the firms and the future evolution of the firms. Lot of forecasting, lot of judgment, lot of analysis as well involved in this situation. So when we talk about competitive moves, we also have to talk about the retaliatory moves that could happen. We can think of retaliation by players to competitive moves by a firm in terms of two frameworks. One, simple retaliation framework, and the other, complex retaliation framework. And within that, you can have technical moves or commercial moves. Now, what are the simple retaliatory moves? You can make product improvements, you can make service improvements, you can enhance the digital support. The commercial moves basically are in terms of channel changes, that is training the dealerships for better service or making some changes in the way the service is offered, the warranty terms, etc. The second commercial move could be price discounts, and the third is finance support. These are all the things which are normally done by any firm on an incremental basis every year. What could be the complex retaliation framework? Again, technical moves and commercial moves. In terms of technical moves, every now and then you can bring in new generation products, an automobile with completely new design language, with new aggregates and marked improvement in technological efficiency, which others find it difficult to match. You can set up new plants to take capacity ahead of demand increase, and those capacities would help market share growth. Commercial moves could be trade-ins, that is, you may say that every product will be sold once an old product is offered. So it helps the company to retain its loyal customer base, but also take the products from other loyalties and get into that market space. Trade-ins could be a powerful medium for enhancing the market base of a company. From being a digitally savvy company, a company could go in for digital commerce. That is, not only the physical commerce, but digital commerce could be taken up in a very strong way. And there could be very specific moves that promote brand switching. So these complex retaliatory moves require firms to make strategic investments. They cannot be done with low budgets, and they also take long time to fructify. To make sure that retaliation is not disproportionate and wasteful, firms should compile perfect information on competitor moves. That is very much required. Who moves first? That is always a dilemma. Progressive firms have their eye on both the short term and the long term. Continuous product improvements or yearly model changes are always commonplace, but step function strategic changes are becoming the new normal in today's situation. No firm in today's situation, therefore, waits for the other firm to make a move in the competitive arena. In oligopoly structure, people would be capable of undertaking competitive actions more or less simultaneously. It is not that one would have to watch what is happening. One would know that this is how the other firms would move. Computer, mobile device and tablet product segments have new product introductions on an almost quarterly basis. And that cadence or that periodicity is well set. One doesn't have to really look at other competitors to do that. Even infrastructure players are now committed to plans that take them into the future, 5 years, 10 years, and even 15 years. And they are competing to encroach on each other's territories in advance. So when you see a group bidding for all the airports aggressively, it is not because it is profitable immediately, but it is a play on India's growing infrastructure and growing globalization, and position the company ahead of others. The differentiators for firms in the contemporary oligopolistic structure would therefore be in the terms of innovation in product development, effectiveness in marketing, excellence in manufacturing, and efficiency in the marketplace delivery. Strategic agility, which brings together all of these factors and provides an integrated competitive move, is very much necessary for companies to succeed. Making competitive moves in parts or in bits and pieces is not going to be very helpful. Competitive moves have to be well thought through and must be integrated to provide the best possible impact in the marketplace. If everybody is trying to make the moves, who is going to win? This win position is supported by core competencies rather than generic functional strategies. If you look at being a cost leader, being a differentiated company, you are not going to win in the competitive moves substantially, because more competitive firms are possessing certain core competencies. Therefore, while it is good to look at these three generic strategies which I have outlined, you also must move from being generic to differentiated based on core competencies and aim for contingent business results, that is, business results which are linked to the core competencies. So understanding the competitors in terms of their core competencies is also an essential foundational step in understanding the overall competitive canvas and making the right moves. At the beginning, I talked about two fundamental market dimensions, that is, the ability to influence the market and the ability to compete with the other firms. And each of these dimensions has three sub-dimensions. In terms of influence in the market, firms typically are of three types. They can create their markets, they can just maintain their markets, and some destroy the market. For market creators, the core competence lies in product innovation and in creating an entirely new market or a new market segment through their products. Apple and Samsung represent outstanding players in the communication and computing device industries. They created new markets through the larger cell phones. Apple created the first convergence designs that were commercially elegant and universally appealing. Samsung created the phablet kind of phones. Market maintainers are those who are competent enough to ensure successful product improvements, and they are product followers but not of obsolete variety. They keep the market live and they expand the market through their product followership. Most firms in an oligopolistic structure belong to this class. Companies like Lenovo are a good example of this class, both in communication and computing industries. Lenovo may not be the first to come up with a new lightest vehicle computer. However, they are at par with other innovators and differentiators as soon as such products are introduced, and they back it up with delivery efficiency and other service related factors. The third category of market destroyers are companies which are faced with declining competencies. They are unable to influence positive market development for themselves or for the industry as a whole. Desperate, such firms flood the market with cheap products of low functionality and uneven quality, and they constitute a striking example of market destroyers. In fact, they may even sully the industry's reputation in the overall. Not every industry would have firms belonging to all the categories all through the years. It is, for example, impossible in the computer industry or in the smart device industry or even in the white goods industry to have substandard technologies or substandard approaches to product development. But it could well be possible in the FMCG industry because the demand is so diffused and it may become very difficult to link a product to the technological strength. One instance of a market creating firm may also be followed by several instances of market maintaining firms and a few instances of market destroying firms in industry. But industries also have a responsibility collectively to limit the market destroying temptation. That's where industry associations and collection of the leaders, the wise companies in the industry matters a lot. Let's look at the shared dimension. As I said, the shared dimension, that is the ability to take market from others, the competitiveness angle has three subdimensions: share building, share maintaining, and share losing. Share builders are those firms that have core competencies in marketing effectiveness, manufacturing excellence, and delivery efficiency. It is taken for granted that their products have got product superiority and technological efficiency. Now they are communicating and they are building their core competencies in the marketplace using those leveraged product development capabilities, whether it could be of innovation or even followership. As a result, the market share improves. Market creators are also natural share builders because they build an industry itself on the basis of their product. Therefore, they are also natural share builders, and the market develops somewhat monopolistically around their innovative products. However, market creators also may fall a prey to excessive competition that could come in. Their natural share building advantage may not be used properly if core competencies in marketing, manufacturing, or delivery start faltering. The second category is that of share maintainers. Share maintainers are in an equilibrium state in the oligopolistic structure. They are not share seekers. They are also not going to give away their share all too easily. They have a balanced portfolio of mid-range competencies capable of maintaining a reasonable market share in an oligopolistic market. Share losers, as I said, are typically uncompetitive firms. They lack differentiation, they lack innovation, they lack even proper followership. They can't improve the products properly, they can't introduce the products in the marketplace with responsibility. Their manufacturing facilities could be suspect in terms of the quality standards. These are the kinds of companies which are share losers, and there are companies which exist in every industry because fortunately or unfortunately affordability of products determines demand for certain segments of the market, and therefore they tend to be available in the industrial space. Market maintainers try to assiduously create competitive advantage, just as share builders also do, but the market maintainers or the share maintainers do that to compensate for the lower level of product innovation. In the case of share builders, the level of product innovation drives a natural advantage in share building, whereas the share maintainers, for want of such level of product innovation, do extraordinary marketing to be able to compensate the lack of product innovation and gain market share vis-a-vis the share builders. And in this process, eventually they end up stabilizing their market share rather than improving it over share builders. That is the situation there. So typically firms in an oligopolistic industry can be categorized in the 9-grid matrix that would be presented next. When you are a market builder and you are also a share builder, you will be the most competitive firm because you have created the market all by yourself and you have also built the share. On the other hand, if a firm is market destroyer and also is a share loser, that is the least competitive firm, and it is good for the industry if those least competitive firms are minimal. And generally only a few firms fall in the least competitive grid. Most firms fall in a spectrum between the two polarities, that is, they occupy the other 7 grids. The essence of the competitive moves of firms would be to move to grids that reflect a higher competitive advantage, and it may not be possible to linearly and quickly move from one grid to the other grid which is farther away. They have to be synchronized to the strengths and weaknesses that the firms have. Once this grid is conceptualized and effectuated in the live industrial setting, the competitive strategy framework for companies would be very optically appealing. And several of the concepts we have learned so far can be effectively applied in such a transformation. We can identify the strengths, weaknesses, understand the core competencies required to qualify for the superior grids, and with logic and with commitment, the companies try to acquire those competencies. We also have to remember that each grid would have its own entry and mobility barriers, the ability to raise resources, and adding challenge to the execution of competitive moves. These concepts of industry level instability and firm level commitment that we saw earlier could also be added to this 9-grid matrix. So let's look at this 9-grid matrix. Visually we can place companies in any of these grids. That is a company which is a market developer and which is also a share builder. A company which is market maintainer but is a share builder. And finally, a market creator who is also a share builder. We discussed that grid of market creation and share building is the most virtuous and most effective and most influential grid. At the least, we have the market developer and the share loser, and that's not a great grid to have. But we have several other grids which are available where companies can move. You can be a share loser today, but you may try to get into a situation where you are share maintainer. So this grid is very helpful for companies to see themselves where they are coming in. So let us discuss the competitor typology in terms of these 9 grids that have been outlined earlier. X-axis represents the market makers in terms of 3 categories: market destroyers, market maintainers, market creators. And the Y-axis represents market penetrators or the competition players, share losers, share maintainers, and share builders. As we discussed, the extremes are the 2 cells of market creation and share building, which is the best and the virtuous cell that should be there for any firm. And the worst position is the market destroying and share losing proposition. But across these spectral opportunities, we have 7 other cells which could be occupied by different firms based on the competitive moves. One could be a market maintainer and could be a share builder. One could be a market maintainer and could be just a share maintainer. One could be a market maintainer but could also lose shares. As you can see from this, most of the firms would be in the market maintaining and share maintaining cell. And the companies which are there in the share building and market creating mode would be 1 or 2. And also it is not easy to move from one cell to the other because there would be entry barriers and there would also be mobility barriers. This is how the competitor typology would optically look, and we can provide quantitative depth by maintaining certain metrics to govern how market makers and market penetrators work. Let's look at this 9 grid matrix to understand a typical firm. It works well with revenue, profit as well as market size, market share markers. The most competitive grid corresponds to the high revenue, high profit markers as well as to high manufacturing scale and high market share markers. And the converse is true for the least competitive grid. Once this construct of 9 grid matrix is recognized, we can easily see that simple defensive or offensive functional strategies would not be adequate. We need to have more elaborate strategies. Let us look at Tata Motors in the automobile field. It is an Indian automobile firm that is a market builder and also a share builder. In 1985, it started an aggressive product addition program. As a result, LCVs and SCVs, that is small commercial vehicles, were added to its portfolio, apart from diversifying and deepening the 3 or 4 ranges: heavy vehicles, medium vehicles, light vehicles and small vehicles. This has enabled the company to expand the market and also build the share. So Ashok Leyland has been its principal competitor in the commercial vehicle range, and the company has been a market and share maintainer, transiting in recent years, however, into share builder class through superior operational and market financing strategies. So product development improved along with operational and market financing strategies. Volvo, on the other hand, has been a niche player in the bus segment. It had high performance, low floor buses, but it has just been a share maintainer despite having high product innovation, and that too at high price. Force Motors and Navistar were new entrants into the heavy commercial vehicle industry, but they have not been successful. They lost the market, they also lost the share, and that was prompted by the inability to develop the required core competencies in the medium and heavy duty segment. Competitive moves of firms in the superior grids tend to be a combination of offensive and defensive strategies, while firms in less competitive grids look to transit to superior grids, but they need to follow a string of offensive strategies from model development to operational excellence, channel building and brand building. That is what overcoming entry barriers to superior grids entails. So the basic parameters are set by the industry structure. and the competitive moves are made by firms vis-a-vis others. So we have an 80-20 rule that could be looked at, because industry instability arises from the evolution of technologies, processes and resources, as much as from entry of new players or exit of existing players. When the new entrants or the substitute products that are offered also entail higher technology, better process and higher resources, then the level of industry rivalry would increase. It is also a relative term. Monopolistic structures has milder instability compared to duopolistic one, whereas the fragmented industry would have much higher level of instability. The level of instability would reduce when an oligopolistic industry structure moves to a duopolistic or a perfectly competitive one where everybody is balanced with each other. Oligopoly offers an opportunity for competitive firms to dominate the industry by way of a 20-80 rule. That is, 20% of firms dominating the 80% of value. Taking the example of the Indian automobile industry passenger car segment again, you will find that out of the 20 companies that are available, 80% of the companies, that is by number, they dominate the total market more or less. So we have Maruti Suzuki, Hyundai Motor, Tata Motors are the companies that dominate the market with 80% of the production. The other companies also exist, but they are not having the commensurate level of production or sales. So that has happened because of appropriate competitive moves. As I said, the commitment of firms to the industry often demonstrated by the level of product innovation, investment in R&D, investment in manufacturing, infrastructure, capacity building and talent building have a major role to play in determining relative industry instability and relative firm stability. On the other hand, if a firm is not committed to the industry and doesn't make these kinds of investments, then it will lead to eventual exit by the firm, because it will start losing the market. It will not be able to create any other supplemental market segment as well. This may not be bad either, because such exits could lead to consolidation and stabilization of the industry in favor of those who have the competencies to build the industry, to build the market, and also consolidate the industry amongst themselves. The domestic Indian airlines industry offers a great example of the framework of competitive moves and the concepts of industry instability and firm commitment, which we have discussed so far. We have Air India, Jet Airways, Air Asia, Indigo, SpiceJet, Go Air that dominated the Indian domestic industry. However, Air India was once upon a time was the only company that was dominating the airline situation. With liberalization, many companies entered, but not all could maintain the market, nor all could maintain their share. There was an eventual shakeout, and companies which had weak market creating and weak share maintaining capabilities went out. But some companies such as Indigo Airlines could emerge as high quality, low cost market maker and share builder. Vistara came into that space later on, and Jet Airways remained as a share maintainer without investments in capacity, technology and talent. Whatever investment it made was in terms of merger of Air Sahara, which didn't have an appropriate infrastructure, fleet strength and route strength. As a result, Jet Airways went down under because of the acquisition rather than adding to the scale and scope. Air Asia became a fringe player, neither here nor there. It was not able to compete with Indigo with the same level of features and service capability. As a result, it remained a fringe player in spite of the investment by Tata Group. On the other hand, Vistara, which came later, became a successful airliner because it offered a comfort and service that reflected a high level of airline service execution. So competitive moves were made in different ways, some with a desultory manner and some in a very committed manner. Air India is now going into the Tata Group's stable, and we can expect a new level of competitive moves which would try to build the market as well as build the share for that company, but they would have to be backed by the service parameters going to the next trajectory. So core competencies and competitive moves are very much interrelated with each other. Competitive moves must be based on a substructuring of the industry, on the dimensions of innovation and excellence, and then specifically woven around core competencies required to move from inferior competitive grids to superior ones, or to defend presence in superior competitive grids. So it is a kind of decision tree that a company has to make. What is the industry, and how would I like to approach the industry? What are my core competencies? How would I like to use my core competencies in terms of building the market or building the share? And what are my degrees of freedom available in this process? And then take appropriate decision. In this decision making process, the 9 grid matrix which I have outlined in terms of influencing the market or penetrating the market would emerge as a very useful conceptual and analytical tool. The current positioning will be very clear, and the likely core competencies to take the company to a new desired position would also be very clear. To become a market creator and a share builder requires the ultimate competencies of a competitor in an industry. Innovation and excellence have to be of the highest order in the firm. But there are also other grids which could provide reasonably good and in fact better than industry average returns through select competencies. And those also can be pursued. It is not required for every company to be in the highest superiority grid. So that's how we can look at competitive moves. Thank you, and we come to the end of this lecture.